Okay, Psych 222, Unit 6, Part 5. We're going through Waller's chapter 8 of Becoming Evil. And he was talking about the factors that create a momentum towards initiating, sustaining, and coping with evil behaviors. He said there were three factors, right? So there's professional socialization, which we have just sort of gone through. There's group identification, which we're about to cover. And then we will look at binding factors of the group. Okay, so here we are with group identification. Two mechanisms that extend and amplify the power of identifying with a group in a context of cruelty. The first one being repression of conscience, and the second one being rational self-interest. So repression of conscience, outside values get excluded. Locally generated values dominate, right? There is a new normal when you're, part of some group that's perpetrating, evil against others. So Raoul Hilberg here identified 5 stages through which perpetrators pass on a journey to repression of conscience. So this is sort of how, you can quiet the little voice in your head saying this is wrong, right? First, supply of information was shut off from everybody who didn't need to know it, didn't have to know it. So, this is just an example of, a document. Geheim is stamped on it. That means secret. So a lot of secrets were kept. Information was shut off from those who did not have to know it. Second, they ensured that whoever did know participated, so that everybody who knew was also complicit. So those who knew about the shootings in the East, for example, were the ones who were doing it and the ones who were ordering it, right? Third, criticism was not allowed, right? It was not an environment where one could say, I disagree. And fourth, the destruction process was never a topic of social conversation. So after a long day of rounding up Jews and killing them, they didn't sit around talking about it. They never discussed what they had done. So Hilberg says, there are some things that can be done only so long as they are not discussed. For once they're discussed, they can no longer be done. So they didn't put words to it. They didn't reify their actions by talking about them. And fifth, they never mentioned killing or killing installations, even in secret correspondence when such things had to be reported. So there were all these euphemisms which were a camouflage vocabulary. And that served a self-protective function too, right? You never had to read about or say or write about killing. Okay? So there was extermination, liquidation, finishing, actions, special treatment, cleansing, resettlement, and so on, right? Which were euphemisms for murder. And in cases where desensitization didn't come quickly, alcohol was used to help perpetrators commit their evil acts. So a lot of these guys were drunk, and that helped to kind of reduce their inhibitions and quell their misgivings. And once a person becomes desensitized to their atrocities, brutality comes to be seen as an accomplishment, right? This is how good becomes bad and bad becomes good. There's an inverted moral universe. The brutality of murdering becomes a mark of distinction. It means they're good at what they do. It means they're tough, right? The perpetrators' efforts now go towards figuring out how to do it better, not thinking about whether they should be doing it at all, right? But how can they do their job even better? And the callous attitude towards killing is facilitated by contexts, situations that promote diffusion of responsibility and de-individuation. So a little bit about diffusion of responsibility. In large groups, responsibility can sometimes get divided up into such small parts that no one seems to be to blame. The sort of touchstone example of diffusion of responsibility is the murder of Kitty Genovese. 1964, this young woman was attacked and killed in a Queens, New York neighborhood with no less than 38 witnesses, at least the standard story goes, although there's some evidence that suggests maybe that wasn't quite right. But nevertheless, nobody intervened. Nobody called the police when she was screaming for help until after she was dead. And so this awful story inspired these two social psychologists to look into what are the dynamics behind people stepping up and helping when there's an emergency, right? So this is Darley and Latané. So they did a study that has come to be known as the seizure study, where they were asking the question, how willing would participants be to come to the aid of what sounded like another student experiencing an epileptic seizure over an intercom? How long would it take them to come to that student's aid, if at all? So here was the setup for this study. As part of a course credit, 72 students, 59 female, 13 male, participated in the experiment. They were asked to discuss what kind of personal problems new college students could have in an urban area. So that was the kind of cover story. Each participant sat in a booth alone with a pair of headphones and a microphone, and they were told that the discussion took place via an intercom to protect the anonymity of the participants. Right? That was, again, part of the cover story. So some of them believed that they were part of a two-person group. There was them and some other, presumably student, that they could talk to over the intercom. Some believed they were part of a six-person group. There was them and five other, presumably students, talking in this six-person group. At one point in the experiment, one of those other people, because they're all Confederates, they're all in on it, one of those other people stages a seizure. So if you're the participant sitting there in the booth with your headphones on, you can hear this person kind of struggling, choking, and then sort of crash, bang, boom, and then silence, right? So what the study is really about is how long is it going to take for that person in the booth to get up and go seek some help, right? To react to the victim's crisis. What they found was the number of bystanders had a major effect on the participant's reaction. Remember that there's two conditions, right? There's the condition where there's the participant and one other person, and there's the condition where there's the participant and five other people. Of the participants in that alone condition, where it's just them and the person having the seizure, 85% reported the seizure with an average time of 52 seconds, meaning that they got up, got out of that little room, and looked for someone to help. When it's the six-person group, that number drops to 31%, right? So they believe that there are other bystanders in the six-person group, and it took individuals longer in that group, an average of 166 seconds. No gender differences, but definitely a difference due to whether they perceived themselves as being the only witness or one of many. Similarly, there's the smoke-filled room study, and I do have a little clip. It's got no sound on it, but you'll still understand it perfectly well. It's footage from the smoke-filled room study. How willing would participants be to report that smoke was filling a room? How long would it take for them to say something? So the setup is these people are being brought in to participate in a study, but before the study begins, they sit in this waiting room filling out paperwork. And there is a condition where it's just the participant by themselves, and there's a condition where it's the participant with other people in the room. And the other people in the room do not react to the smoke. Okay, so there's an alone condition and a three-person group condition. And what they found was when the person's alone and they see smoke coming from underneath an adjacent door, they get up and report it pretty darn quickly. We're looking at about 75% within 3.5 minutes, get up and do something. And of course, many way before that. But in the condition where there's two other people sitting there doing nothing, the person, may do nothing for a long time. And at the 6-minute mark, when they kind of call the study, we're still looking at maybe about 35% of people who actually got up and said something 6 minutes into the room filling with smoke, right? Similarly, the lady in distress study. How willing would participants be to go to the aid of what sounded like a woman falling off a ladder and injuring herself in an adjacent room? How long would it take them to come to her aid, if at all? And again, there were two conditions. There's the condition where the participant is alone and they hear this lady in the room next door fall off a ladder. And there's a condition when they're with other people and they hear the lady in the adjacent room fall off a ladder and the other people do nothing. And again, we find the same pattern. When alone, most people went to the woman's aid within 30 seconds. But when another person was present, less than 10% of people helped, even after 2 minutes. So across all their experiments, the percentage helping when in groups was lower than the percentage helping when alone. So alone is the blue bars, people in the group is the kind of pinkish bars there. And we're looking at percent responding to emergency across these studies. And the findings are dramatic, right? So this is known as the bystander effect, when people see others in need but fail to help them. Two factors help to explain the bystander effect. There's pluralistic ignorance, which is the error of assuming that no one else in the group perceives things as we do. So to intervene in an emergency, we have to first recognize it as an emergency. And if the other people in the room aren't reacting, then you might think to yourself, they don't seem too concerned. Maybe I'm misinterpreting the situation, right? Maybe this isn't an emergency. You know, lots of people walk by a person lying on the pavement. The fact that other people are walking by might make any one individual think, well, I guess maybe this isn't an emergency, right? And then there's diffusion of responsibility, when a person is less likely to take action when others are present, right? So, you know, you might think to yourself, somebody should do something, but if there's a lot of somebodies around, it might not occur to you that you should do something, right? And so responsibility is diffused, it's spread, it's shared across all the people. No one person feels responsible. Now, an organization can set up a routinization of behavior such that responsibility for the outcome is divided among members of the group, right? No one person is in charge of capturing and killing an individual. It's all divided up. And so people can say, I myself never killed anybody, because responsibility is diluted. It's diffused among the group members. Right? This is why when in states where they have the death penalty, when a prisoner is put to death, there isn't a single executioner. There's a bunch of people on a team, and each person does one step in the process so that no one person is going to feel like they personally, individually killed someone. And so in situations like this, where you're responsible for just a small piece of the bigger engine that's causing destruction, people will shift their attention away from the morality of what they are doing to the mundane details of doing their specific job efficiently, right? Well, I just scheduled the trains, right? You know, that's all I did. Or I just opened the bombardier hatch and dropped the bombs. That's all I did. Right? I just pressed the plunger, you know, the first plunger of poison that would kill the prisoner. I didn't press the second or the third, right? This is also why, you know, when they would put people to death in front of, you know, a bunch of shooters, there was always more than one person firing. Firing squads have lots of people. It's because, therefore, you know, no one person in the firing squad is going to feel responsible. Nobody knows which gun, which bullet from which gun killed the person. So the focus goes from thinking about the purpose of the cattle trains to making sure they run on time. This is the banality of evil concept, right? That it becomes about doing your job, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, right? It creates an ethos among those who did the killing, in which refusing to kill would only alienate your friends and colleagues, and in the end, not deter in the least bit the killing operations, right? If I don't do it, somebody else will. There's lots of people doing it. It wasn't just me. You know, if I say I'm not going to do it, I'm kind of just being a jerk, right? And it also creates displacement of responsibility. People will do things they don't agree with when a legitimate authority says that they'll accept responsibility for the consequences, right? They're going to issue the orders. This is Milgram's agentic state, right? Where individuals become agents of the authority figure. Every great atrocity is the result of people following orders. Okay, I'm going to pause here. We'll pick it up at de-individuation in the next piece.